If you're new to studio lighting, I want to start by saying this. It is completely normal to feel nervous. And confidence, it takes time and practice. But the important thing is you don't want this nervousness to freeze you and stop you from learning. Every single confident studio photographer that you know, that you can think of, the ones that you admire, they've stood exactly where you are right now. I'm Lindsay Adler, and I'm a portrait and fashion photographer. And today, I'd consider myself a lighting expert, but obviously that's not where I started. My very early setups were so unglamorous. I had the cheapest hand-me-down light. It basically had 3 settings. It was quarter power, half power, full power. I had 1 modifier. I really had no tools with me. Like, my setup was this. My living room was my studio. I had 1 reflector, 1 cheap light, and an umbrella. And what I did in the beginning is I practiced using myself as a model, but I didn't learn alone. What I did is I grabbed another person who was new to studio lighting to learn along with me, and that happened to be my mother. And what we did is we worked step by step, making a ton of mistakes, but every shot we took, we would write it down in a journal so we could figure it out later on. And by the way, this was the days of film, so we didn't even know if the shots came out till later. But what we did is experiment and learn and take notes. But this is one of the things I want you to keep in mind. It's a shift in your mindset. Confidence does not come before experience. It comes because of experience, so you have to just start. You don't want to wait until you feel ready, until you've watched every tutorial out there. You practice until things start to feel comfortable, familiar. You don't want to avoid starting just because you feel lost or frustrated. And I hate that feeling, trust me, I avoid it in my life far too often, but you have to push past it because that's part of the learning process. You're not doing anything wrong. So today what I want to do is I want to share my tips for how I built confidence in the studio. Now, by the way, before we dive in, I did want to mention that I have an extremely in-depth course called Master Studio Lighting. It covers everything from exposure to modifiers to working with 1, 2, or 3 lights, understanding the quality of light, like all of that, if you want to have a strong foundation. Plus, it's got a lot of hands-on elements to it. But now let's just start with some practical sides to building confidence. I'm going to share the 5 things that I think made a really big difference for me to feel at ease with studio lighting and to build to where I am today. My very first tip is to practice with another photographer who is new to studio lighting. I really think it's one of the easiest way to lower the pressure because you're not competitive. You're not trying to impress someone else. They're learning along with you, so there's no expectations. You can take turns. One person's the photographer, the other person's the subject, or one person's the photographer, the other person's the assistant in this. And it's just a nice learning environment that feels safe. For me, this partner, it was my mother. And this type of practice, it really teaches you something valuable that a lot of you might not think about, but it's about what it feels like to be on the other side of the camera, to be the subject. That perspective alone is going to be really important later on when it's time to direct a real subject or a real client. Now, how most of us learned in high school or in college, wherever you learned along with other people and you had this beautiful sense of discovery. It's a process that made learning more enjoyable. And so go to meetup groups, photo clubs, local photo communities, like things like that. You're going to find someone who wants to learn and experiment with you. Just make sure you choose someone who's compatible with the way you like to shoot. You want it to be collaborative, not competitive. My second tip is to start with a mannequin or just another stand-in subject. A mannequin head is a surefire way that you have a patient subject. You can practice on your own time because it doesn't move. You can also move the light just a little bit and you'll see how every change affects the light in the end. I also find that if someone's waiting on me, I get nervous, but if it's a mannequin, I can slow down and I start to see how shadows shift, highlights form, the light wraps around the face. It's a quiet, observational environment that the way that I work, I need it because it's free from anxiety. It also gets rid of a common excuse. Like if you are trying to schedule a model to come in, oh wait, I couldn't find someone to shoot, and then that just holds you up. If you have a mannequin head, you can practice whenever you have the time, even just a few free minutes. I personally have a handful of mannequins that have been my trusty models for years and years, since the very beginning. My next suggestion for building confidence in the studio is to make sure you set aside dedicated practice time. I don't think confidence comes from occasionally experimenting when you're feeling inspired. It comes from consistency, just the little steps and improvements. That's why what I do is I make non-negotiable practice time. It is so important for me. I give myself assignments and I thrive on these. So for example, when I was in college, I had access to studio lighting and I knew this wasn't going to last long, so I needed to make use of it then. So during my senior year, Every weekday, I would set aside 3 or 4 hours to practice every day. I seriously am not exaggerating. So when people are like, oh, how'd you get so good at studio lighting? How did you learn? I can say repeated practice and hours and hours. So after college, when I entered the real world, I didn't want my experimentation to stop. I wanted to move beyond the basic lighting that I had learned through experimentation. And so what I did is I treated Sunday as my shoot day. It was a standing reservation, the standing time where I was going to practice every single Sunday. And so instead of just practicing once a month, once every other month, by the end of the year, I had 50 practice days. What I do and I recommend is to put practice on your calendar the same way you would a paid shoot. Over time, you stop wondering if you're going to improve because you are going to clearly see the progress. So to this day, more than 25 years into shooting in the studio, I still schedule practice times because I want to discover new setups for myself. I want to continue to advance and get better. This time is essential, so treat it as such. My next tip also has to do with practice. When you set up these practice days, go in with a clear plan or like a little bit of a goal. Because if you sit down to practice and you don't really know what you're working on, it often leads you to feeling frustrated, or maybe you're not really making progress, especially if you have a limited amount of time. It might feel like one specific goal before you begin. Maybe your goal is to see how changing the height of the light is going to affect the way the light looks on the face. Maybe you want to explore how one modifier behaves in different instances, like how you can shape and modify it. Maybe you're recreating setups from one of my lighting guides. Like whatever it is, pick one goal. One of my favorite approaches and something I recommend is to find a photo you really love and then break it down if you can to figure out how it was lit, and then work backward to try to recreate that light in the studio. You can do this with a mannequin, and then once you nail it, if you're like, yes, I figured out the light, then you can try it on a real subject. This is how you build your portfolio. So have a goal. This is going to allow you to enter your session feeling a little bit more confident and use your time efficiently. And at the end, feel like you learned something. My final suggestion for building confidence is that you want to document your setups and results. For me, this made a significant difference. As I was taking photos early on, I was also taking a behind the scenes of what I was shooting. Photograph where your lights are placed. Make notes about what worked, what didn't, like what you found that surprised you, what you were attracted to visually. This doesn't need to be elaborate. Like nowadays, you can just take a picture with your iPhone, jot down a sentence or a note or two. What matters is that you're keeping a record of your problem solving. If you want to be a little bit fancier about this, there are a bunch of free apps that are lighting diagrams that you could actually use this to stay organized. Or if you want to get more advanced, there's programs like Set-A-Light 3D. This program is awesome because you can build three-dimensional lighting diagrams and then actually simulates the results. These tools are so useful because sometimes maybe you don't have access to the studio, or there's a tool you want to try that you don't own. You can actually do that with Set-A-Light, and I've linked to that in the description as well. Years ago, all I was doing is jotting a few notes into a notebook about the frames that I was shooting, but today you can keep a much clearer record to remember what you like and be able to consistently recreate it in the future. If there is one thing that I want you to take away from these tips, is that the goal of practice is not perfection. The goal of practice is to become familiar, to feel comfortable. When lighting does feel comfortable, you feel calm. The anxiety starts to go away, and when that happens, you feel more confident. You don't necessarily need more or better gear to get better. My recommendation actually is to start with a single strobe, build to a second, and eventually get to a third. And then just start with a basic modifier, an umbrella or softbox. Then later on, add on rim lights or background tools once you feel confident with what you already have. But remember, as you experiment, you're not gonna feel ready yet. You're not gonna feel confident. You'll probably feel frustrated. Confidence takes time. You need repetition, you need intention. And one day, without even realizing it, you're going to look back and realize you already know how to do this. I hope you found these tips on how I've built my confidence in the studio to be inspiring and helpful. And if you want to see some of my key studio gear, be sure to check the links in the description below, and of course, visit Adorama.com. See you next time, everybody.